We are just getting started here. I'm Stacy Berger, President and CEO at the Housing and Community Development Network, and I'm honored to be joined by my colleague Arnold Cohen, our Senior Policy Advisor, and Tamika Moss, a tenant who's going to talk about her experiences trying to find and keep an affordable place to rent. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. I just want to welcome everybody and give you all a chance to get logged on. If there are questions for folks, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, but I think the chat box is going to be where our staff is monitoring requests for additional information. If we, for some reason, are unable to get to your question right now, we'll certainly follow up with you afterwards. And of course, you can always reach out to us. So the network, for those of you who are not familiar, is the statewide association of about 275 nonprofit community development organizations, private sector partners, and housing advocates and champions around the state. We are the state partner for the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I am proud to be a board member at NLIHC. The Out of Reach report is the annual or seminal set of data about the expense that residents around the country face when trying to find a modest two-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. Every year we release the Out of Reach report and details both the cost that is faced by minimum wage workers, folks working across a series of industries and sectors, as well as a ranking by county, which we'll get into so that folks can see which counties have higher housing wages. I'm going to let Arnold talk about the data in a minute because he knows it much better than I do, but I want to talk about why it matters and what some of the policy changes that we're hoping to see or that we've seen so far already, and we'll come back to some of those solutions towards the end of the press conference. So Out of Reach matters a lot because it helps us as housing advocates and also nonprofit community developers see what the market is doing to and with folks who are at the most vulnerable stages of their housing security journey. A lot of folks are facing incredible pressure to be able to find and afford a place to live in New Jersey. We have a tiny bit of good news this time around. In the past, New Jersey has been 5th or 6th at the most expensive place to rent a two-bedroom apartment. And we're not talking about a fancy luxury condominium. We're talking about a place to raise your family and stay safe in the community of your choice. And so in the past, we've been 5th or 6th. Last year, we were 6th. We were the 6th least affordable place to afford that kind of two-bedroom fair market apartment. And this year, we have dropped slightly to be 7th. So it is not a top 10 list that any state wants to be on, but we are moving at least in the correct direction. We believe, and that's in part because of the strong steps that our state government and our federal government to some extent have taken to make sure that people have a safe, affordable place to live, providing rental assistance, some renter protections, and as many of the members of the media and our members know, the state rental assistance program was opened for the first time in recent memory for people to join, and the demand is very clear. There's about 4,000 state rental assistance program slots and about 86,000 people applied. So it is great that we are moving and trending in the right direction, but clearly we have a lot more that we can and must do to make sure that everyone can afford to call New Jersey home. We are thrilled that the state government, our legislature and the governor have adopted what we're sure is the largest investment in housing and housing security in New Jersey history. It's a $305 million that's going to be deployed, we hope, very quickly to create about 3,000 additional rental homes in communities that have a fair share housing obligation, but may not have had the resources to provide those development opportunities. Now have that funding, and we expect that those communities are going to break ground and keep moving forward so that people can rent those homes in very short order. There's additionally $170 million set aside for lead paint remediation, which was going to make our housing stock, some of which is extremely old and in ill repair, safer and healthier for residents and their small children in particular. We know young children are the highest risk of lead poisoning, and that for the very lion's share of that lead poisoning is preventable, and it comes from paint that is chipping or peeling, especially low to the ground on a windowsill or at the bottom of a wall. So that $170 million is going to be deployed quickly, we hope, as well. We believe that's going to help put those homes that have either previously been unsafe and therefore uninhabitable, or unsafe and inhabited nonetheless, back into the market in a safe and secure way for families with children and families who may have children, because we certainly don't want to be housing people in a place that's going to make them sick, and certainly not something that's going to make them sick for the rest of their lives. Lead poisoning is entirely preventable, but almost untreatable, especially once it gets to a crisis point. So we need those funds to make those homes safe for everybody. And last, there's about $100 million in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which we look forward to our members and other developers utilizing to make sure that they're building and creating homes that people can afford in the communities of their choice. So we've seen a significant investment, a historic, unprecedented, without comparison really, housing budget that's going to invest in our most vulnerable, lowest income neighborhoods and communities. And we are really thrilled and honored to partner with the Murphy administration and members of the legislature who made that investment happen. So we look forward to those dollars rolling out and keeping people safely and stably housed. So I've given a little bit of information about the outreach report, but I want to turn it over to my colleague and friend Arnold Cohen, our senior policy advisor, who's going to walk us through the data and talk about how difficult it is for folks, even though things have gotten a little better, how difficult it is still for folks to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in the state of New Jersey. Arnold?
Thank you, Stacy. So there's different ways at looking at this data that talks about how much money somebody needs to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment. And we're focusing here on 2-bedroom, but there's data there for 1 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms that people can look at in more depth. So one way to look at it is who's impacted the most by the high cost of rental housing. And so there's certain parts in the state where we have more renters. In Hudson County, about 68% of the residents rent. In Essex County, 56% of the residents rent. Statewide, it's about 37%. So if you're in a place where there's a lot of rentals, you're going to be more impacted by the out of reach report. The second way to look at things is where is the fair market rent, which is what HUD calculates is what you need, is the cost of a modest 2-bedroom apartment. And so the places that fair market rent is most expensive is Hudson County, where it's $1,972 for that modest 2-bedroom apartment. And then Mercer, Somerset, Hunterdon, right behind that at $1,854 for a modest 2-bedroom apartment. The other way to look at it, though, is what it costs relative to what people are earning. So in the southern part of the state, although the fair market rent is a lot less, the median wage is also very much less. And in fact, in Cape May, Cumberland, Gloucester, the median wage is really right above that $13 an hour minimum wage, meaning that the cost for people to rent an apartment in those 3 counties is actually more unaffordable than for people in the rest of the state. For folks who are on fixed income or minimum wage, this is also very difficult. So for example, a minimum wage worker would have to, and again, we're lucky in New Jersey that minimum wage has gone up to $13 an hour because of the hard fights that people have waged to get that $13 an hour. But still, somebody would have to work 96 hours or 2.5 full-time jobs to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment at minimum wage. And then if we looked at the mean wage, what most people are making for where they're working. If we take a look at the 30 jobs in New Jersey that employ the most people at them, 22 of those 30 jobs pay less than what you need to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment. So what you have is people working hard, doing all they can to support their family, and are still faced with the very difficult decision of where they spend their dollars on food, clothing, keeping a roof over your head. And people shouldn't have to be, who are working full time, shouldn't be having to face those kind of difficult decisions. So the out of reach data looks at the 2020 census data and then adjusts for inflation. And because we've had unprecedented inflation and increases in rental housing costs over the past year, the data that we're presenting today really is, the picture is much worse than what we're presenting in the data today, because because inflation has gone so much higher than anyone would expect. So want to leave folks with that snapshot of what it costs. So for somebody in New Jersey, we're talking about needing to earn $65,000 a year to be able to afford that modest 2-bedroom apartment. And as you see, that is out of reach for many of our residents. And we'll be talking about solutions and what both the state and federal government can be doing to address the situation and make it better for all of us.
Thanks, Arnold. I just want to reiterate, the idea that somebody working minimum wage would have to work 2 full-time jobs, more than 2 full-time jobs, just to be able to put a roof over their head. And even though, as Arnold said, New Jersey has one of the higher minimum wages around the country, which helps make things slightly more affordable, I think everyone knows that we are in a situation where the basic things that people need to survive, the cost for those things are out of control. And some of them are supply chain issues, and some of them are just predatory and unscrupulous folks taking advantage of the situation. And so we know that people are suffering and they're hurting, and it's not right. And we need to make sure that our elected officials at every level of government are doing everything they can to make sure that people have their basic needs met. And I want to ask Sunika Moss, who's a tenant, who's been experiencing the very high cost of rental housing herself as an individual, to talk a little bit about what she's experienced and what she thinks folks can do to make this better. Sunika?
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm just, well, in my experience, I am currently looking to move. I've been in the same apartment for about 8 years now, and you just watch. I have 3 children of my own. I have custody of my niece, who is 5. So it's 4 children in the home, and I'm currently in the process of looking for an apartment. So I was initially wanted to purchase a home, and then COVID hit. So I wasn't comfortable doing that. So now I have to, things changed a little bit. So now I'm trying to find another apartment until I feel a little more secure in the housing market, until things kind of settle out. It is one of the most discouraging things that you could ever really have to go through. I work at a women's center, Heart of Hannah Women's Center, that also assists with housing. I, speak to the women every day who are looking for housing, and I'm telling them, oh, don't give up, stay encouraged, keep looking. And I realized I knew how hard it was But I think that once I actually began to look again and get out there and see, actually really had to look for myself, it dawned on me like this is something that seems impossible. Just trying to find an apartment that you can afford in a safe area for your to raise your children seems like almost equivalent to walking on the moon at this point. It seems so far away. You're turned away. The prices are out of control, and the ones that you can afford is just in probably the worst parts of the scariest parts of town, but these are the ones that you can afford. I was looking at the information that Arnold shared, and I'm like, was it $1,736 for a 2-bedroom? That is expensive, but at the prices we're seeing right now, it almost seems reasonable. I seen an apartment this morning for 2-bedroom and probably one of the worst parts of town for $2,500. A 2-bedroom apartment. Who can afford that? Who, like, I'm sure there's people that can afford it, but in this community, and like that to me is just horrible. And it's sad because I have to leave work and go and look for an apartment and, be turned away and come back to work and try to encourage these women to keep going when I myself feel like I want to just give up. Like a person who can afford to pay rent, even like without the assistance of a voucher, is struggling. And then imagine the people who have the vouchers because they can't find an apartment, because everything is all of the prices are above the FMR. So programs that are giving assistance won't cover it because it's above the FMR. Like your voucher allows you to go up to $1,700, but a 2-bedroom apartment is $2,500. And it's just the expectation is just so unrealistic. It's like, what do you do? Where do you go? Where do you get the help from? It's really disheartening and discouraging. And the amount of families, individuals that I come across that have this is the norm, just the struggle of trying to find an apartment is the norm now. And I've came across some families who have lost a voucher, received vouchers, received assistance, and lost it because they were unable to get housing or find an apartment in the length of time that they were given. Like it is a real problem. And to be honest, the only way that we're going to change it is through, legislation. Like something has to change, or the homelessness is going to be much worse than where it is now.
And we've seen that around the country. Thank
Absolutely.
you, Tanika. And we've seen that around the country. We're seeing places that are doing the opposite of helping people by criminalizing homelessness, making it a felony to sleep outside. We live in one of the richest countries in the history of humanity, and the idea that we could send billionaires to space but not make sure that everyone has a safe, affordable place to call home is very disconcerting and really makes us think that some folks have their priorities backwards. Right. If people don't have a place to live, we need to invest those funds in that we're spending on other things in people, so that folks are not spending their time when they could be helping other people trucking around and looking for a place that doesn't exist. We've had a couple of
Absolutely.
questions about the data, so I want to turn that over to Arnold. I want to thank you, Tanika, if you can stay for a little bit. I know you're busy at work,
Absolutely.
helping people who are understandably frustrated. I do hope and think that that the investments that we're seeing at the state level are going to make a difference, but it's not instant and it doesn't happen tomorrow. We know that there's been a number of investigative attempts to make sure that our policymakers, regulators, and compliance folks at the state level are looking to be sure that folks who have a voucher are not facing discrimination from landlords who have to take that voucher. But I think there's definitely more that we can do to talk with folks to make sure that everybody knows what their rights and responsibilities as a landlord are. So we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So if you don't mind staying with us, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Arnold, I want to turn it over to you to answer a couple of those data questions.
Sure. So a question came up about the fair market rent. So the fair market rent is a number that HUD comes up with where they look at the apartments that are renting in what's called a statistical area. So the area of Essex, Union, Sussex, Morris is one statistical area. And they will do a survey of those rents and then look at what the 40 percentile rent is. Because the idea is that the fair market rent should be for a modest 2-bedroom apartment, not the most expensive, not the least expensive, but at that 40%. Now, what they looked at though, when they looked at that data, that was before you had a lot of these high-end apartments coming online, charging outrageous rents. And again, as Misha said, the HUD, if somebody has a housing voucher, has assistance from the federal government's idea is, well, we won't pay for something that's a fancy apartment. We won't pay above the fair market rent. And so that's a way that she's seeing that landlords are able to legally discriminate against people. And there are ways around that. A public housing authority that issues the vouchers can choose to pay more than the fair market rent to help somebody be able to use that voucher. But that's a decision that needs to be made by that individual housing authority.
Thanks, Arnold. We've heard from a number of our members and folks in other parts of the community development sector that the fair market rent is something that we really do need to have HUD take a deep look into and make sure that it's being reflected, that the costs are being properly reflected. So that's something that we've begun to engage in a bit of advocacy about. Tanika, we had one question from a reporter for you. If you could potentially tell folks in general what area you're looking to rent and why you're leaving your current apartment, if you're comfortable sharing that.
I'm not, I'm open to anything. I'm just looking to rent somewhere that's safe. I'm currently want to leave where I am now because I've watched the neighborhood change over the years. There's, some crime. I'm not really comfortable allowing my children to go outside and play. So and I don't think that that's too much to ask to allow children to go out and play in the yard and for you to feel comfortable with that. And at this point, that's not our reality. So I just want to, find something safe and affordable where I can raise my children.
I think all of us here think that's a very reasonable and fair thing to want to do and support you and everybody in that same situation. That is what everybody who has family and wants to live in a community wants, right? They want a safe place to call home. And so that's why we're pushing our elected officials to adopt the House New Jersey agenda, which we think will do a lot to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. And I just want to hit on a couple of the pieces of that policy change. that we're looking for. One is to make it easier for people to apply for and find out where they are on statewide housing lists. Right now, renters have to go through a lot of hoops to even find out what's available and also to apply for homes that are available. We would like to see a similar system to what's been adopted in New York City, where there's a universal application and a universal application fee, and folks are not faced with having to apply for a credit or background check every single time they apply for an apartment, because that alone costs thousands of dollars for people who can least afford it, right? It's also really time consuming having to continue to apply for something and continue to apply for something and continue to apply for something. So it's really both Byzantine and also seems predatory on the back end, charging folks for apartments they may never even step foot in or have the ability. Did you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. Like when you think about things, $35 doesn't seem like a lot right this moment, like to try to move into an apartment. But when you have to pay $35, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, that money adds up, and it could be going toward, your house. We have inflation, gas prices, groceries, all of these things that we still have to take care of. And now we're paying $35, some of them $50, only to be, turned away. So you're basically almost just kind of like giving money away, taking money out of your household. And if you're using a realtor, because, sometimes it's a little easier when you use a realtor because you have someone kind of, if you have a good one, kind of helping you out and speaking on your behalf and different things like that. Those realtor fees are insane. So that you have to pay a realtor fee, an application fee, security deposit. These are thousands and thousands of dollars that is coming out just to try to find safe, affordable housing.
Yeah, it seems like a racket. I mean, that's just right. It's just a way to. It's just another way for predatory landlords and developers who
Absolutely
are looking to make a little extra money. It's something has to be done. It is outrageous and unconscionable. $35 is real money. I mean,
right.
That's not right. It's not. Right. It's not. Even if it were $5, it's still a lot of money. And it's a lot of money that is not, you're not getting any product for,
right.
Right. You're just,
right.
All you're doing is
paying it, and that's
right.
it.
You're paying it, and you're never even stepping foot inside the apartment, right? You're
right.
just waiting for them to call you back. So yeah, we have that as an advocacy issue on our radar because it just seems so grossly unfair and unnecessary for sure. So there's legislation that is pending that would streamline the application process, at least for state supported developments. But I think there will be additional conversations with elected officials about how we can make that broader to really require landlords to only be allowed to charge that if they're actually making an offer of rent in good faith. And we saw, we've seen changes in the market as a result of the Fair Chance in Housing Act, which requires landlords or doesn't allow landlords to take, to use criminal background checks prior to making a conditional offer of rent. So there's precedent now for making sure that tenants are being protected. New Jersey does have some of the best tenant protections in the country, but we know that we can do better. We need to have transparency for investor-owned properties and LLCs who are buying. We learned last month, a huge number of properties as they go onto the market, especially in our urban communities. We are waiting for the governor. We hope he will sign without any delay or changes the Community Wealth Preservation Act, which would allow folks who are facing foreclosure and their home being potentially put up at sheriff's sale to have first dibs, so that either they or somebody in their family might be able to purchase that home at a reduced rate. And that, we believe, will keep the investor folks out of state, unscrupulous investors from buying up those properties, which I think you're seeing as you're renting, as people are looking to rent, we are seeing more homes come off the market in a way that doesn't build generational wealth and certainly does not address the systemic racism and institutional racism that we've seen in our housing market for hundreds of years. And there's a reason, that those investors are targeting Black and brown communities, because those neighborhoods tend to have less generational wealth and have lower home ownership rates. So we want to be sure that we are taking every possible step forward to make sure that those homes are staying in those neighborhoods. And if there isn't a family member or someone related to the homeowner, that a community development organization that has a track record of restoring those homes to the community has sort of seconded on it. That's another way that we want to keep those properties in control of the community and not being, sent out to bid where there are no guardrails. And I think we, as a state, need to have a conversation about reasonable rent control. Right now, we have unreasonable rent price gouging in an environment where people have been through 2.5 years of a pandemic. We have asked people to make enormous sacrifices in their personal and professional lives. People have seen, their home become school. Their home has become the doctor's office. Their home has become, their workplace. And so making sure that everyone has a safe, affordable place to call home should be our #1 priority coming out of the pandemic, because that is what kept us safe. It is what people will go to when they need to be safe and to protect themselves and their families, as we've seen the latest variant continue to drive up the infection rate. People are still quarantining at home, and unless they have a safe, affordable place to do that, we are not going to be able to control this or future health pandemics without making sure that people can stay home. So it is unconscionable that there are no limits at this point on what folks can be charged for rent. We're not saying that landlords can't make a reasonable return on their investment, but we're seeing between 18 and 25% rent increases without any justification, or except that some landlords feel like they can. So we need to have an honest conversation with our policymakers about what's being experienced by people who have also borne the brunt of the pandemic in a much, in a disproportionate way. I think that's a key policy area that we're going to be working on together. I also just wanted to lift up a couple of other housing proposals that are in the legislature, including eliminating the credit score standard for recipients of state and federal housing subsidies, which is a piece of legislation that has been on the radar for a long time, but needs to be moved in this legislature, we believe, in this legislative session. And additional accountability and penalties for landlords who violate renters' rights. We saw last year the Asbury Park Press did a really great expose on renters who have rental assistance vouchers, but who were just flat out denied a place to live by landlords who really had no compunction, no problem saying, "Oh, I'm not going to take that voucher." Landlords can't do that, and we represent a number, quite a few nonprofit landlords who know the law and follow the law. And unfortunately, the landlord that we had hoped would be with us today wasn't able to join us, but we certainly can put reporters in touch with nonprofit landlords who are doing the right thing, continue to do the right thing, and want to be in a position to rent to folks with vouchers, because those folks need a place to live, and that's the business that our members are in, is making sure that people have a safe, affordable place to live in a great neighborhood. Don't know if there are other questions. I know that our team has been
Stacey, can I just mention two
You
federal bills?
absolutely can.
So on federal level, and this is where the big dollars are, this is where we need protection to be coming from. For that housing voucher that we talked about, that housing assistance, both in New Jersey and federally, of people who are eligible for housing assistance because of their income, only 1 out of every 4 eligible families receive any housing assistance. We contrast that to something like food stamps. If you are, because of income, eligible to receive food assistance, everybody who's eligible will receive that food assistance. With housing, only 1 in 4. And so we have some federal legislation to try to address that. There's the Ending Homelessness Act, that Congressman Bonnie Watson Coleman is one of the sponsors are, along with Congresswoman Waters, which would make housing vouchers universal for everybody whose income was eligible by income would be able to receive that. And that's an important step forward. Will the Build Back Better Act that passed House of Representatives was going to significantly increase those vouchers. That didn't go anywhere. Housing appropriate that, and we're looking for the appropriations bill in Congress to be able to again significantly increase it. But we need to move towards universal vouchers, which is what that ending the homelessness bill does. And the other bill I just wanted to talk about for a second is bipartisan bill that would create an emergency rental assistance and make that permanent. We saw emergency rental assistance during the pandemic, which really did a lot to help keep people in their homes, especially in places like New Jersey, that really did an excellent job in getting that money out. This would be a bill that would give states dollars so that when people are facing a crisis in their lives, that make it impossible for them to be able to pay that month's rent. They don't lose their home, but they get assistance to be able to help them get through that crisis. And that's another critical piece of legislation that we need passed by our federal government.
Thanks, Arnold. We'll continue to press for those. The emergency rental assistance bill is, something that we believe very deeply is absolutely necessary and keeps people out of homelessness. It is unbelievably gutting to see other states and jurisdictions around the country criminalizing and penalizing people for not having a place to live. That is the absolute backwards approach to making sure that we are better towards each other and that we treat each other with kindness and compassion during all the time, but especially during a public health emergency like what we're seeing. The emergency rental assistance at the federal level keeps people from becoming homeless and keeps people who are on the edge of housing insecurity from having to face and make very, very difficult and just impossible choices between taking care of themselves and their families. And we know that there's a disproportionate impact in our health outcomes when people do not have a safe, affordable place to live. So we see people making, choices about their health and their health care that are not the best for themselves and their families in order to be able to keep a roof over their head. People forego going to the doctor or can't go to the dentist because they don't have that kind of coverage. And so these things are all connected and related. And when housing is out of reach and safe, modest, affordable places to live are out of reach, it is a spiral downward for everyone. It costs everybody more money to keep people in a shelter than it does to keep them stably housed in a place of their own in the community of their choice. That we need to make sure that everyone has access to safe shelter on an emergency basis. But as a society and a community and a state, especially in New Jersey, where we care about each other and we want to help make sure that everyone has the same opportunities to thrive, we need to be doing more and be doing the best of our ability to invest in communities and people to keep everyone in a safe, affordable place. And so we will continue to do that while we're glad that New Jersey has gone from 6th to 7th least affordable place. We would like to, this is the only list that we want to be at the very bottom of, and we still have a lot of work to do and a lot of road to cover to get there. But we are going to continue to work with Tanika and folks just like her around the state to make sure that our legislators at the state and federal level hear from people who are impacted directly by the decisions that they make. Our advocacy teams are working overtime to connect with elected officials and be sure that they're hearing about what consumers and constituents want our elected officials to do, and that's to invest in housing security, stability, and affordability for everyone. So I don't see any more questions. Oh, go ahead, Tanika.
If I may, there's another thing that I just wanted to kind of bring some exposure to. Is the fact that landlords and developers are asking for people are requiring that they make that their income is 3 times the amount of the rent every month. And this is another way to keep people out, because it's just
because
not,
nobody makes that.
it's not realistic.
Right? It's crazy.
It's not realistic at all. It's not realistic for someone to, not that it's not realistic. I'm sure in some places this is happening. It's just, it's not happening here. For
not.
me, it's not happening.
And
I think, I'm sorry.
And especially because, all this new housing that's coming online, it's being built is luxury, quote unquote, luxury housing. So they're not building for the wages that people make in New Jersey. They're building for wages that high-end earners are making. And so if we adjusted what we're building to what people are making, that would be a different story.
Right. I get.
And people, we want to make sure that people are earning a living wage and they have good jobs in industries that are going to grow, and that they feel valued at work and are, involved in productive labor that contributes to our communities and our society. But asking people to have a job that pays 3 times the rent when there's no control over what the rent is and a lot of control over what the wage is seems like putting folks between a rock and a hard place. And so we need our elected officials to step in and keep people from being completely at the mercy of a predatory sector of profit making. We need people's housing to be a human right, the same way that clean air, clean water, healthcare, those are all things that people need. As Tanika said earlier, it's not a lot to ask, right? To have a safe place to raise your family and let your kids play outside. And that, I think, is something everybody viscerally understands. We need our policymakers to turn those wishes into reality, and make sure that we're funding and supporting efforts to do that. So I want to thank everybody. Tanika, I want to thank you especially for being with us. We're really honored to have you here, and look forward to amplifying. You are very welcome. We look forward to amplifying your experience and what you've heard and seen to policymakers, to the network staff who put this together. I want to thank you very much for making it a seamless presentation. We are hopeful that in the future we'll all be able to safely be together, but we're still doing many of these events by Zoom for everyone's health and safety. And Arnold, thank you for sharing all of that data. If reporters or other folks have questions, please send them to us. Nina, if you don't mind just putting the info email in the chat, so people can access that main or your email, so that folks can send us follow-up questions if you have them. All the charts and materials we talked about will be on our website. Our national organization, our national partner, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, is simultaneously releasing all of the countrywide national data. I believe they're doing that right now. So there'll be additional information about how New Jersey fares with other places. I believe that I know last year there was no county in the United States where a minimum wage worker could afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, which is shocking and startling. I'm running out of adjectives to describe the dismay that we see when we see these numbers. I think that the numbers are slightly better this year than they were last year in terms of the county level where people can afford to rent, but it's still dismal. And we know nationally we need to do more. And so we are continuing to partner with NLIHC on the house campaign. And Arnold talked about a couple of those key priority issues, including making sure that everyone who qualifies for rental assistance gets rental assistance. It's just unconscionable that 75% of the families who need it don't get it. We're working to change that, and we look forward to seeing that changed in the very near future. So I want to thank everybody for being with us. Thanks to everyone who spoke, and thanks to everybody who's been with us and following these issues for so long. So if you have questions, please let Nina know. There's her email in the chat. Sorry, my chat is a little delayed, as well as the information about the national report. Thanks, everyone. Have a safe day, and stay cool out there. It's going to be another hot one.